Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for a lovely and engaging panel. My question is actually to no one in particular, it's general. So we hear about quite substantial figures being committed by the government towards quantum research in the UK. You hear 270 million, you hear 150, then there's the supposed 200 million from the industry. So I'm just curious, it sounds like a lot of money, but then when you divide it into a number of years, a number of hubs, it probably gets diluted pretty quickly. So I'm just curious whether you think that the level of government commitment and the industry commitment that they encourage is sufficient, or in short, is it too little?
I'm happy to comment on that. I think the current figures, certainly that Sir Peter Knight was quoting yesterday, if you look at what's gone in the last 5 years and what is projected for the next 5, including the industry contributions, it's getting towards £1 billion. It's been about 500 million total in the last 5 years. And that is one of the biggest UK investments in any technology direction. So it's certainly very substantial. I think it's fair to say, and you made a very good point, that by the time it's divided up by year, by group and so on, it's not as big as you would think it is. And so, for example, our hub had about £25 million over the last 5 years, and we've got something very comparable going forward. But we've got 10 university groups and industry involved. And you're right, by the time you share it out, it doesn't come to as much as you might think. But I think the important thing to realise is that both in industry and in universities, what we've done in the hubs is we've brought together existing real UK expertise in these areas. So these groups have already been funded from a number of other sources and continue to get that funding. So this is providing some additional funding into the group so that they can do whatever it is, technology application work, in addition to the fundamental research that they're doing and so on. So it's not like that they've had to build a laboratory from scratch on this funding. They've already got well-established laboratories because it's the UK expertise that we've already chosen. So I think given that, it's working very well, and certainly the rest of the world is taking notice. But you're right, if we'd had to start from zero and build completely new empty labs up to something, I think it would not be enough. But that's not the way the program has worked. So I think on that basis, I'd certainly say it's working very well.
Yeah,
so I've got two things to say. If we sort of work from the premise that our future prosperity as a nation will be based on our intellectual assets, it will be based on the inventions we make, the inventions that we, and that's the only way that we can compete internationally. We're not going to compete by having the lowest wages in the world, or at least I hope we don't want to do that. We are in a bit of a sticky place at the moment, because when you compare what we as a nation invest in research and development, we come in at about 1.7% of our gross domestic product. 1.7% of our everything that gets spent, paid for in the UK is that. That if you compare that to our main competitors, they're sitting at 2.4%. So actually, as a nation, we are spending spending about 2/3 of our competitors, and sadly, we are probably not 1.5 times smarter. So we are, of course, smarter, but it may only be 1.1 or 1.2. I haven't been able to do the math. So that's my first observation, and that undoubtedly has to be a public-private partnership. And I think one thing that the Quantum Technology Programme has done very well is combine government investment with industrial investment, and that is absolutely the way to go. And now I'm going to do something else. I'm going to say something. Who will get ready to expel me. If I look back at the last 5 years, and I look at the money that's come into my own research group from the UK government, and that's the taxpayer. Thank you all very much. I hope we are good value. Actually, I've had an equal amount come in from Europe, and my group pretty much has been funded 50-50 by the UK taxpayer and the European Union. And of course, depending what happens in the future, that avenue for supporting the research and development that takes place in the UK is clearly under threat. And I think it's really, really important, whatever the outcome, I'm not going to mention the B word, but whatever the outcome is of that, I very much hope that a way can be found which allows the UK to remain part of that bigger international picture. And it's important, not just for the funding. Of course, the funding is important. But if you actually look at how science and research and development works, it is an international endeavor. And you look at even just the personnel within our own research, or indeed some of us, generally, we've got to remain connected. And I think that was one thing that the European science program did very, very effectively, and I hope that it continues to do so.
Yeah, can I just comment quickly? Because the Royal Society have added up the figures, and they've shown that over the last 10, 20 years, doesn't matter where you can, we've done very well out of European Union funding projects, the UK. Absolutely. And unless that is maintained, there will be this significant drop in funding in the future. So it's going to have to come from somewhere, even just to keep us where we are.
Absolutely. Well, let's hope for the best. Yeah. Any other questions in the audience? Yes, gentleman right here.
It was good to hear of the cooperation between universities and industry, our businesses. I'm wondering how much we're working as an island, though, and whether we're specializing in some area of quantum computing or quantum physics compared with, say, for example, the American people who must also be working in similar fields.
Who would like to take that?
So just, if I may just say a few words in response to that, I think it's actually, we should, so often we think in the UK that we missed the boat and, the hovercraft or whatever. And actually, full credit to people like you mentioned Sir Peter already. We internationally were the first nation, no question, to try and put together a funding package to bring together, let's say, university academic research in quantum technologies with the UK industrial base. And the Americans are pretty much, even when you look at the wording of their system, dare I say, copied our call. So I think we actually started off in a very positive position. And actually, I know, not myself, but I know you three, I think, are all going out to the States next week to discuss with them as to how we can better collaborate. And I think one of the important things in all of that is that we keep hold of the fact that we want to make sure that some of that new technology is exploited within the UK and within the UK industrial system. And that is something we are very, very aware of.
Thank you. Yes?
If I just may add, so completely agree. So in terms of the industry collaboration, of course, so we are looking around as academics to keep track of what's happening around the world. We look for collaboration. Industry funding from the UK government is, of course, helping UK industries, first of all. And so I think that's one of the big strengths of the program, that has been fully coherent between academic, commercial funding, and also government organization funding, so that you really had coherent working across all sectors of the economy and academia. Most of the companies we have been interacting with, and there are hundreds of companies, we have really created an ecosystem of small companies mostly, working with the academics locally, and that creates a base to make it actually sticky in the UK. And this is the supply chain, which is really growing at this moment. And the large multinationals who will pick up that supply chain, they will transport it out. But due to having that seed firmly sitting in the UK, there's a large chance that we can actually keep a lot of the industry here and drive it from here. So I think that's the big thing, in addition to, of course, creating the skill base, which the early start of the program has created a unique skill base, which made several large multinationals say, actually, we put our quantum technology research centers into the UK because they are creating the skills, they are driving this field forward. First of all, they are a few steps ahead.
Great, thank you. Would be great to hear as well from our younger audience members here. I see a lot of school children. I don't know if... There we go, yes?
in World War II, there was a system to prevent frequency jamming, and it used two pieces of paper with patterns on them to know which frequency to go on. Could you create an utterly random version of that using a quantum computer, so making it a totally unhackable signal?
That's a great question. Dominic, maybe? Who would like to address that?
Let me try and interpret the question. So tell me if I've got this wrong. Are you suggesting a way of hiding the communication rather than doing it in a way that even if people intercept it, they then can't learn about it? Because there are people working on various approaches to communications where what you send actually has hidden in it something. So with the quantum communications I was talking about, you don't try and hide the quantum signals inside another one. It's just that you send them, and if people intercept them, you know they've intercepted them. So, but there are other ways of actually hiding information inside bigger signals of things, and people are working on that in parallel. I don't think it's fair to say that's as far developed yet, but there are clever ways. They call it hiding, so people can actually hide a signal inside something else. So that's where you put information where people maybe don't expect to find it. Whereas the communications I'm talking about at the minute, which are more advanced, are where you have a signal that can be used to distill a key, but it's not that you hide that signal in something else. It's the fact that because that signal's quantum, you can't actually intercept it without leaving evidence of your interception.
But in terms of hiding information,
you can hide it, right?
Some of our colleagues from Strathclyde, everyone's heard of Wi-Fi, okay? But there's also Li-Fi. And so actually, if I look at the bulbs up above our head, they're probably LEDs. And so actually, it's possible to encode those LEDs with very, very high frequency information. And we saw some of those demonstrations yesterday at the event, and I think we've got the same demonstrator here, where you can actually hide the information that's being transmitted in a light bulb, either as part of the room lights or indeed against sunlight. And so there's all this work going on in our hub about having very subtle and covert, if you want to call it that, light beams, relying on the quantum property of the light so that Tim and I can read and send each other a message, but Kai over here can't distinguish our message from the normal room light or from the normal light bulb. And so that kind of secure communication is something that quantum technology is going to be able to deliver like you wanted.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes. I don't know where the other microphone is, but...
It's the man with the microphone.
Oh, sorry.
There's one over there as well.
Somebody asking a question here? Okay, well, why don't we do that, and then you...
I don't want to go backwards in the conversation because it was a bit built on the point about industry collaboration. I do some work with the University of Bristol on a slightly different topic, but one of the things that they say is when companies like Google or Microsoft or Amazon approach any discipline, they can absorb or suck up huge quantities of talent in sheer numbers and, of course, the skills available. So do you see that becomes a longer-term issue in the quantum computing world? And also, what do you do to inspire the next generation from a young age to come and join, apart from Christmas lectures and so on and so forth?
Thank you. Great question.
So the search for talent will always be a problem in any field. So, we're something like, I can't remember the number I last heard, 50,000 engineers short in the UK, or 50,000 STEM graduates a year short in the UK. And so in any field, the search for talent will be a problem. In something like quantum computing, it's an acute problem at the moment that the big players, Google, IBM, can offer good working conditions, good salaries, exciting careers. in the quantum technologies program, I actually think that because we're such a vibrant community across the hubs, with the students we have, with the researchers we have, the possibility of doing a startup rather than going working for Google. The government announced probably over a year ago now, they'll build a national quantum computing centre where the UK will push forward its own agenda in quantum computing beyond what the computing hub does. There's excitement around the field. So I think we have a counter to the Googles and the IBMs of the world, that we're doing exciting things. It's a vibrant community. And academia is a nice place to be. It's interesting. You get some freedom. So I think we have a problem, but in some ways we're better off than other fields because we have this really vibrant community and program going on at the moment.
Thank you. Yeah.
Just to add to that, I think the way business works in terms of acquiring new technology has changed, certainly over the last 20 years. So I worked for Hewlett-Packard for nearly 15 years, and when I joined Hewlett-Packard, the idea was that if you wanted something new in terms of technology, you would invent it within the company. And that has evolved now to the fact that you mentioned Google. Big companies now just have very big pots of money, and if they want something in terms of new technology, rather than invent it themselves, they just go and buy a startup that's already doing it. That's the quickest way to pull technology into a big company. So that is going to happen. That just seems to be the way. But I think there is always this balance between people who want to work in academia, have some academic freedom and research on what they want, versus perhaps being paid more to work in industry on something that you're told to. So I think there will always be a tension there. But it's regarded as a success in the modern world if from a university an idea turns into a small company, and that small company prospers, raises some venture money, and then a few years after they've proven what they're doing, they get bought by a big company and absorbed into it. That's regarded as success these days. So I think that's inevitable. I don't think you can work against that.
Yeah.
So I'll give my 2 pence too. If I won't stand for election, don't worry. That's going to happen. Big companies are going to buy up small companies. And I think our opportunity here in the UK is to go, actually, dear big company, and Kai was mentioning it already, is come and invest in the UK. This is where you want to be based. And why would the big company want to be based here? It is access to talent. So actually, one way of future-proofing, I think, our high-tech economy is by making sure that our students, that our education system is really, really strong, and that we are providing a ready, high-tech, literate, quantum literate, in our case, workforce. And so the likes of Google or whatever go, actually, if we really want to develop a quantum computer, maybe we should think of setting up in the UK and tapping into the talent that's here. So I think our future will be a talent-based future.
Thank you. So yeah, there was a question right here. Yeah, great.
Hi. So, oh goodness. I heard actually in this room a number of months ago the head of the Royal College of GPs say that the NHS is very bad at standardizing technology and adopting it across the entire country. Do you think that's going to pose a significant problem for the technologies that you want to deploy for medical imaging or whatever else?
Great question.
I think, yeah, okay. Any medical innovation is always going to take a bit longer because you have to do lots of clinical trials. You have to prove that it works much better. And there are quite a few people who say that in countries where you have a different health system, which is sort of more looking at more ready to invest into new technologies, you have a faster transition. So the NHS is certainly under quite substantial pressures in terms of cost savings, so that it might be a bit harder. But still, if we have the talent pool here, so a lot of the technologies which are done in the UK, also in the medical space, are exported. So it might be adopted elsewhere first, but eventually it will come back. So I don't think it hinders us to make the innovation. There's definitely a very vibrant research community to do the clinical trials and do the research, and you see that in the brain imaging work, which is just starting now. Yeah, the adoption that has like new barriers where maybe the UK is not always the best place to like get it first into like clinical applications.
Great.
Can I just...
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Dom.
Sorry. So on the quantum computing side, actually, because the program's been relatively joined up, we actually speak to government who could be potential future users. So we're speaking to the parts of the government, parts of that could be users of quantum computing in the years to come. So trying to make those links early. So and actually, it's been a remarkably fruitful set of discussions that we've had. Now, clearly, it's early days, but like all these things, if you start the discussions early, when something useful actually comes along, people are more receptive to it. So actually, that's been a very positive experience, I think, and a good one.
Can I just comment? So thanks very much for the question, but it's a broader question than the context in which you raised it. So standardization is very important for technology, particularly if you want to sell it worldwide. And so it's not just in the medical quantum technology space, it's actually in all of the quantum technology space. So one thing I can give you a quick example of, in quantum communications, because we've known how to get it to work in terms of sending light signals from Alice to Bob for 10 years or more now, and the technology's been operational in some sense, and you've been able to buy it, then standards are already being put in place. So I won't say it's job done, but people have started that process of putting in place standards for quantum communication. So in the future, when there are various companies that will sell you things, you can at least, if everything adopts the same standard, you have an assurance that they'll be able to work together. So you don't have to buy all your stuff from one place, and you'll be able to add new stuff to it later. So standards are very important right across the technology space, not just in the medical. And there's a lot of work to do, but people are starting there.
Great, thank you. Yeah, question just there.
So it sounds like there's a lot of new applications of quantum technology, but there are also a number of applications which either substitute for or perhaps improve in some ways existing classical technologies, whether it's computing or the security sides. What is the difference in power consumption where there is a direct comparable or close comparable, and how do you see that gap changing over time?
Thank you. Who would like to take that?
So I'm quoting figures from my memory from the Google announcement, and it was something like the supercomputer would be 20 megawatts and it was 20 kilowatts for the quantum computer or something. It was those differences because the scaling of those two processes occurs in a different way. With a conventional computer would be brute force scaling, if you like, just you need to build a bigger one. Whereas the quantum, it scales in a different way as you increase the number of qubits. And it's clear. Well, is it clear? It certainly seems to me an area for certain areas, I think you'll see that sort of dramatic change. Now, whether those will be played out in practice, I think there's a lot more detailed engineering to be done, but those are the numbers I remember off the top of my head.
Anyone else would like to add anything?
Well, I can just chip in, wave my hands a bit. In terms of communications down fibre, then one thing that we've actually got implemented and working at the minute is where we use the quantum keys that we send with the quantum light signals to then encrypt high-speed conventional data. And we even do that down the same fibre. So you can take one channel in the fibre to send the quantum signal, and you can send all your high-speed encrypted data down all the other channels. And there, I think it's fair to say the energy or power overhead that goes on top of the conventional high-speed comms is pretty negligible, because what you're doing is you're distributing keys and you're using those in all the conventional encryption stuff then to encrypt the high-speed data, send it. And I think most of the power consumption there is doing what you were doing anyway in the conventional side. So the add-on there, I think, in that scenario, for example, would be very small. So I'm sure there are others where it wouldn't be quite so trivial. But in that case, I think there's a very limited additional overhead.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes?
You mentioned how quantum can break encryption. So my question is, could a malicious actor harness the technology and put everyday people's data at risk?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah, I can hear
Sorry, maybe it was a bit fast. Could someone harness the power of a quantum computer to maybe start stealing data? So if a lot of our data is encrypted right now, like banking information, could we one day be at risk of a malicious actor using the technology?
Well, yes, I think is the short answer. So it is, I think, thought that the security agencies of many countries currently record all sorts of encrypted stuff that they see flying around, even if they can't decrypt it at this point in time. And when they have access to technology in the future and can decrypt it, then they will. So I think that threat is there. So we know that exists, and we are trying to work against that. And I think it's worth mentioning that I've talked about quantum communications. People are also trying to come up with new forms of mathematical encryption, which are at least thought to be immune to attack by a quantum computer. It may be very hard to prove that they're immune, but nevertheless, there are very good reasons for thinking. So I imagine the secure communications that we adopt in the future will be some hybrid of quantum communications and new mathematical encryption, such that even when Dominic's got his big quantum computer, he won't be able to work out what people have said.
What you're having for dinner.
Yes.
I mean, I liken it. It's a bit like if you look at the way banknote technology has changed over there's always this continual battle between the person trying to do what do the good thing and do the not so good thing. That we've seen holograms on banknotes, we've seen lots of features that stop that thing being stolen or in some way. And as Tim says, there's a sort of, at the same time, quantum computers are growing in power, people understand the risk, and there are sort of the methods of creating the next generation of encryption resistant to quantum computers is going on, with standardization planned, competitions ongoing and things like that. So there's a sort of measured process to get to the point where the next generation of digital encryption will be something that's adopted.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, I can't quite say yes.
Hi, it sounds like the model that you've got of the hubs and the communications with, or the connections with industry and government is a very powerful and successful way of working. And I'm just wondering whether other disciplines have wanted to replicate what you're doing or have started to learn from the way you're working.
Yeah. Who would like to take that, Miles, maybe?
Well, the short answer to that is yes. I mean, so there's a not dissimilar system has been set up around battery technology. Just to give one example, it's called something different and it's a different scheme, but it's basically the same idea. More generally now moving forward, there's this thing called the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. And again, that is much more focused around joint working between universities and industry. And so I think, again, it's very easy to criticize the UK, and I often do that. But actually, when it comes to trying to get our university base engaged with the industrial community, actually pretty much the UK has been trailblazing with that, even to the point in which our research is assessed. And so we were the first country, really, to, when the universities are assess not just our academic prowess, but actually the extent to which we've been able to see that academic prowess translate into real impact. And I don't just mean financial, I mean societal benefits, whether it be health, whether it be actually just well-being. The smoking ban. Why is there now a ban on smoking in public spaces in the UK? Well, that was actually academic research, academic drivers showing what the benefit of that would be. And so I think the UK generally now is actually pretty good compared to many other countries in making sure that there is a connectivity between our research base, which is largely a university one, and the end applications to which that research is put to the benefit of us all.
I'd also add that actually there's an academic benefit to the hub as well. It's not just an academic industry benefit, that actually having a broad range of academics. So quantum computing is an area where at one end there are computer scientists who imagine an infinite scale quantum computer, and at the other end some of my team do very detailed microwave engineering. And having that broad, the micro engineers knowing a little bit about what the computer scientists do, I think is extremely helpful. And those broad collaborations, that's been really valuable too. And as Miles said, you can see there are other areas where I think it's... So funding in the UK, there's a sort of umbrella body now called UK Research and Innovation, UKRI, and I think they recognise it as a good method.
Great. Just we have time for one last question, right here.
So you said about, with the quantum encryption, where with quantum encryption, if you transmit it and if it gets intercepted, if you transmit, say, the key and it's intercepted, then you know it's been intercepted. Then can't somebody... So what if the connection wasn't terminated properly, and then if it went on and somebody else got the data, or would it still be readable, and would you still be able to construct a key, or would the interference from it being read by the recipient, would that make it unusable?
Well, the short answer is yes. So there's a posh phrase for what you've described, which is called denial of service. So people could intercept everything and stop you getting stuff through, in which case they prevent you getting a key at all. And that is a problem. But that's a problem in ordinary communications. So, if you only had one link from here to here, then, you'd be very unhappy if a workman cuts that fiber and your internet goes down. But of course, stuff gets through by multiple paths. And so when we're doing this properly in the future, you'd like to think there will be multiple paths for stuff to get from one place to another, in which case it would be much harder for someone to deny service. But in terms of the other point you raised about might stuff go on if it wasn't properly terminated, Miles introduced the idea of photons earlier. So light comes in little chunks, and so the way to think about the quantum communication is, and we don't always do it this way, but this is a nice way to think about it here. If you're sending your information that you wish to use for a key in genuine single photons, then either the person that's supposed to get the single photon gets it, in which case Alice and Bob can use that bit of information that got through. But if somebody else gets it and Bob didn't get it, then they'll know that they won't be using that in there. So they will only make a key out of the stuff that Alice sends that Bob actually gets. So it won't go anywhere else as well. If Bob gets it, no one else does, and if somebody else gets it, Bob didn't.
Can I just add that there's a very important theorem in quantum mechanics, which is the no cloning theorem.
Yes.
And that basically says once you've got a particle, whether it be a photon or an electron, and it's in a quantum state, there is no way that your laws of nature allow you to make a copy of that. It's not like you can get a photocopier and run it through. And so when Tim here has got that information on that single photon, no one can copy it. So if you get it, no one else has it. And if you don't get it, there's a problem.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to our panel.